J.J. Shirade, day 189 of our recordings, starting with Varta 175, the story of a Kshatriya from the south who paid 100,000 rupees for a single rose. Jai Shirade, Sa Vaishnav ko Jai Shri Krishna, Shri Gosaiji ki Jai Ho. The story of a Kshatriya from the south who paid 100,000 rupees for a single rose, Bhav Prakash. This is a devotee of Tamasi disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Sneha Prakashika, who sheds light on affection. She manifests from Ketaki and is thus a personification of her divine loving sentiment. He was born into a family of Kshatriyas in the south, in a village a few miles north of Pandharpur. His Kshatriya father was very wealthy and died when he was 30 years old. He never married and was independent. Part 1. Once Sri Gosaiji travelled from Gokul towards the south. He had prepared some offerings for Sri Thakurji. Afterwards he accepted them back as Mahaprasad, ate, and also fed all the Brajwasis and other sevaks in his entourage. That was when this Kshatriya caught sight of Sri Gosaiji. He supplicated him, "O Maharaj, please accept me as your disciple. I am a very offensive being." Sri Gosaiji replied, "Please go and bathe. I shall accept you into my shelter with the initiation of the Lord's name." The Kshatriya bathed and came back to stand humbly before Sri Gosaiji. He again requested, "O Maharaj, please take me as your disciple." Sri Gosaiji did so, and the next day, after the Kshatriya had fasted, he granted him the Brahmasambandha initiation. The Kshatriya made some large donations to Sri Gosaiji. He then again pleaded, "O great Maharaj, please grant me some seva." Sri Gosaiji presented him with one Sri Thakurji to serve and taught him all the correct ways of seva. He granted him the eligibility to offer both sakari and anasakari preparations, and the Kshatriya readily learnt everything he was taught. Sri Gosaiji then instructed him to always offer items of the highest possible quality to his Sri Thakurji and to never offering anything of compromised quality. Soon after, Sri Gosaiji left that place and carried on with his journey for the sake of uplifting divine souls. It was quite a few days before he returned to Gokul. Sri Gosaiji continued in his seva to Sri Navanit Priyaji, and the Kshatriya Vaishnava served his Sri Thakurji very nicely. After awakening his lord and offering him his breakfast, he would dress him up in the very finest of jewels and ornaments. He prepared fine offerings according to the time and season. After the lord had been settled down to a nap, he would always feed Vaishnavas with Mahaprasad. He did this every day. He also prepared other things for Sri Thakurji to enjoy in his Sen Seva. When he had settled his Sri Thakurji down to take rest for the night, the Kshatriya would come out of his lord's temple. When it became necessary to fetch fruits and other things for offering, he would fetch them all himself and did not ask anyone to bring them. He never penny-pinched or hesitated to spend. One day, the first rose of the season came on the market. He saw it and asked the supplier about its cost. At that moment in time, another man saw the rose and wanted to buy it. He said to the Vaishnava, "I shall buy that flower." As they bargained and competed between themselves, the price rose from 10 to 100 to 1,000 and then to 100,000 rupees. The other man gave up. The Vaishnava paid the 100,000 rupees for that single rose and brought it home with him. He offered it to Sri Thakurji and felt very happy in doing so. He was very pleased as he considered that Sri Thakurji had accepted the offering of the rose from him. At that very same time, Sri Gosaiji was adorning Sri Govardhanaji. When he looked closely, he saw that Sri Naji was wearing a rose on his head. It was so heavy that it was making Sri Naji's head lean over to the side. When he saw the beautiful vision of the Lord with the rose, Sri Gosaiji asked of Sri Govardhanaji, "Oh Baba, why is your head leaning over like this?" Sri Govardhanaji answered, "There is a village where one of your disciples live. He bought a single rose for 100,000 rupees and offered it to me. My head is leaning over with the weight of his devotion and generosity. It is impossible to adequately praise the extent and depth of his Vaishnava dharma." Sri Gosaiji was overjoyed to hear these words from Srinaji. When he had settled Srinaji down for his rest, Sri Gosaiji descended from the Sri Giriraji peak. He called one Brajavasi, told him everything, and sent him with a letter to deliver personally to that Vaishnava. The Brajavasi took several days to reach the village, and when he did, he delivered the letter to the Vaishnava, who first of all put the letter to his forehead out of respect. He was so happy. When he saw the handwritten message, he prostrated before it. He called together all the local Vaishnavas, and they all gathered to sing the Lord's praises. He then fed Mahaprasad to them all. He also honoured the Brajvasi who had delivered the letter. The Vaishnava then wrote a letter to Sri Gosaiji saying, "O Maharaj, all this has happened purely by your grace." He gave it to the Brajvasi, who travelled back to Sri Gosaiji and presented it to him. Sri Gosaiji felt pleased when he read it, thinking, "How very fortunate is that Vaishnava that Sri Govardhanaji accepted the rose from him. There is actually no way to describe how lucky he is." In this way he kept praising the Vaishnava. The moral of this story is that a Vaishnava should serve their Sri Thakurji according to the time of day and season and offer everything to him with love. Then Sri Govardhanaji will accept the offerings personally and grant the experience of his divine presence, in the same way that the Bengali Brahmin offered Srinathji the preparations made from jaggery in his home in Bengal, and so Srinathji immediately left behind the temple lunchtime offerings and went to the Bengali's house to accept his. When a Vaishnava lovingly makes timely offerings to Sri Gosaiji in their own home and serves him with gusto, then the beloved Lord will straightway accept those offerings. This is the constant principle of Seva. Also within their Seva, a Vaishnava should never place importance upon money and thus spend it as and when necessary for making their Seva the best possible. Thus concludes Varta 175, the story of a Kshatriya from the south who was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is no end to his tale. Continuing now with Varta 176, the story of a Kshatriya named Mukunda Das Sekar. Bhav Prakash. This is a devotee of Sattvic disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Aradhika, a Sakhi from Sri Chandravaliji. She manifests from Ketaki and is thus a personification of her divine loving sentiment. He was born into a family of Kshatriyas in the east. His parents died when he was 12 years old. After some time, he set out on a pilgrimage and first of all arrived in Gokul. Part 1. Mukunda Das had come to Gokul for the holy site of Sri Gosaiji. He saw him on Sri Thakurani Ghat. The vision that he had of Sri Gosaiji was that he was the supreme person, more beautiful than thousands of cupids. Mukunda Das implored Sri Gosaiji, "O Maharaj, please take me into your shelter. I have been wandering around uselessly for many, many years." Sri Gosaiji told him to go to bathe in Sri Yamunaji and return to him. Mukunda Das did so immediately. He stood before Sri Gosaiji and supplicated with his hands folded respectfully, "O Maharaj, please grace me by initiating me with the Lord's name." Sri Gosaiji granted him initiation with the Lord's name and then took him into the temple and granted him the second Brahmasambandha initiation in the presence of Sri Navneet Priyaji. Mukunda Das then offered as much of a donation as he could manage and had the holy sight of Sri Navneet Priyaji. He was overjoyed. When Sri Gosaiji had completed Sri Navneet Priyaji's seva, he came to sit in his betak. He then went to partake of prasad, and afterwards, when he had completed the rinsing of his mouth, he allowed Mukunda Das to partake of his prasadi leftovers. Mukunda Das partook of that prasad. He approached Sri Gosaiji and prostrated before him. Sri Gosaiji gave him a position as his eternal attendant. Mukunda Das went with Sri Gosaiji wherever he travelled. Sri Gosaiji was always pleased with him. He revealed all the close secrets of the path of grace to him. Mukunda Das never ever left Sri Gosaiji's side. Bhav Prakash. Here it is stated that a disciple should never leave the Guru's side, even for a single second. Thus concludes Varta 176, the story of Mukunda Das Sekar, who was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava to whose tale there is no end. Thus concludes our reading for today. And we will continue tomorrow. Sab Vaishnavan ko sadar sadenya. Sananda Saprem Jai Shri Krishna. Jai Shri Radhe. Aaj ke Anand ki jai. Shri Vallabhadisha ki jai ho. Jai Jai Shri Radhe.